Welcome to The Sacred. My name is Elizabeth Oldfield, and this is a podcast about the people who shape our public conversations, the values that drive them, and how we could all get better at living with our very deep differences. Every episode, I speak to someone who has some kind of public voice or platform from a very wide range of different professions, perspectives, and point on the many political and other spectra that we find to disagree about. I hope to better understand how they've come to the conclusions that they've reached and get beyond the two-dimensional tribal labels that we assign to each other so easily to the real human being underneath. As usual, please do write a review, share the podcast, and make sure you subscribe for updates. You can also find both me and the podcast on Twitter and Instagram, and we would love you to be in touch. In this episode, you will hear a conversation I had with Zara Mohammed. Zara is Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Great Britain. Prior to this, she helped lead the Federation of Student Islamic Societies, and she has an LLM in human rights law. We spoke about her childhood in Glasgow, her decision to start wearing the headscarf at university, her experiences of being both the first female and youngest ever Secretary General of the Muslim Council, and why she really, after all that, might need a lie down. I hope you enjoy listening. Zara, I'm going to ask you something that does not get asked on the bus or every day, but you have had a little bit of time to think about it. And that's about what is sacred to you as a way of trying to just get rapidly past any kind of small talk and to create some space for you to self-reflect on the values that you try and live by, that you think have been key in your life. And honestly, I don't think anyone really knows what's sacred to them. One of the theories is that you don't know until it's transgressed, and then you get that like ick reaction. It's not really about kind of self-interest and comfort and convenience. These are very deep things to us, but really you can take it in whatever direction you want. What bubbled up for you when you saw that question about what's sacred to you?
I think it did hit deep actually when I was considering, because we don't really use that word sacred, but we all kind of know what it feels, or, it does definitely connect to a journey. And I think for me, it resonated quite deeply in terms of my relationship with God and faith, but also, as you said, in practice. So I think sacred, that whole idea is, this is about protecting faith. There's this idea of like something really spiritual and special. But when I thought about it in my lived reality as the Secretary General of the MCB, as the leader, I think it was about servitude. What was sacred was the sincerity of which I do my work and how I don't allow it to be. Because, when I was elected, within literally an hour, I became a public figure. And so I went from, I'm doing this because it's really important and sacred to me to serve, to, I have a lot of fans on Twitter now. And I think what's sacred to me is keeping the integrity of my work honest, authentic, with integrity, with purpose. And that's down to my connection with faith, spirituality. And it's not the honesty that I have in some ways, with the public audience, because how does anybody know my intention? You couldn't know, she's really angelic, because she's perceived to be, but it's when no one's looking and I'm having those conversations in prayer or thinking about where is my relationship with God? And then I'm thinking, and there's this kind of really good bit of advice that I got from a scholar who said, try and do good deeds in private that nobody can see. Because it's very tempting when you're in a public-facing role, let's take a photo. Let's take a photo. So all of your good deeds are for show. So I think for me, it's really keeping a pulse on how much of what I'm doing is still sacred in that sense, that I'm really doing it because it's coming from my heart and it's not just a photo op. And I think when you're in positions that are very public-facing, it's very difficult because the people around you, in some ways, there's fangirls and fanboys. There are people who do give you, oh my God, you're amazing. And you're like, yeah, maybe I am. So I think it's actually in some ways keeping that humility in the work. But yeah, it made me ponder deeply. And I think sometimes can be a bit difficult to articulate, but that's kind of my go at it.
Yeah. I was at the Lambeth conference recently, which is the big gathering of all the kind of Anglican bishops. And one of them said being a bishop is very dangerous for the soul. And I think there's a similar thing, isn't it? Public faith leader positions
That's it.
can undermine the thing that you got into it for the first place. So yeah, it's good to be aware. We're really gonna dig into that role and what it means and how you use that public voice. But first, we really try to give listeners a sense of the person behind the position, what's formed them, what their story is. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your childhood, and in particular, any big ideas, philosophical, political, religious. And I've asked this question a lot, and I'm realizing that most people's childhoods, those things are not explicit. They're just sort of in the air. Most kids are not handed a manifesto or, anything like that as a child. But I think if we look back, we can think, right, these were the kind of ideas in the air that shaped me. How would you describe that for you?
Yeah, sorry to disappoint you on the philosophical. I don't think they were...
Not many people have gone for that one yet.
They weren't really near my colouring book or, the latest showing of Art Attack, if you can remember, with Neil Buchanan. Do you remember Neil Buchanan? I'm so, oh my God, or, what are we drawing today? But I think there's kind of two things that really stuck out for me in my childhood that I really still kind of remember. And one was in my school class. I got promoted, so I happened to be doing better in my maths and English tests. But I was really sad about it because all the fun kids were in so there was two classes. It was a really big, year like 5. Well, Scottish system's a bit different, but the class was too big, so they had to separate it. So I was with all the fun kids. It was really creative. Everyone was really energized. There was a lot. I had a little group. A lot of fun, a lot of laughs. But unfortunately, I started doing better in my tests and got put into the other group, which was a more high-performing group. As a kid, I wasn't really interested. I mean, maybe other kids were, but I was just more about, what are we doing today in the playground? So I think I always had that kind of natural creativity where I didn't really care so much about the intellectual, but naturally I did have that ability. And so when I was promoted to this other group, I remember there was an art class. It was very kind of artistic. And the teacher said, I want you to draw yourself. How do you perceive yourself? Just draw yourself. 80% was a stick man, stick woman type of persona, right? They just did it. Yeah. Head, legs, arms, done. You had a couple of portrait styles, they got a little bit deeper. But I was the only one in the class that went totally off the grid and drew myself with superpowers and a cape and colored hair and just flying. And I think the teacher actually took mine and presented, well, look what Zara's done. She's drawn herself. And because for me, it was always about what I could be as opposed to even transfixing myself as as I am. And the second thing in my childhood that I remember was the way that my parents were about religion. And it was never really preachy or anything, actually, other than, we pray. They were always feeding people. There was feeding the neighbors. I mean, there was always this idea that we've got to help people around us. And there was such a kindness, whether my mum, she went out to work, that was kind of unheard of at that time. And my dad's a chef. And so he'd tell me about people would just come in really hungry and he'd say, okay, just take a seat. And he'd give them a meal, and he had a really expensive Indian restaurant. So as a young person, and they were like, it doesn't matter what anybody's background is. It doesn't matter what they look like, what the religion is. We just help people. That's the right thing to do. And although it was just food, I just kind of thought, right, sharing is really important. You should always share and give. And so I think those two things, and I still remember them really, probably part of my philosophy, if we want to bring that in, of service, but also of not discriminating about people. And I put my headscarf on later on in life, another kind of big moment at university. And my mother said to me, well, look, I hope you know that it doesn't just because, well, A, you represent something now more bigger than you, and that's important, but also don't change how you are to others around you. It's not about you're going to be in a club now, so, and I think that and being fearless in the pursuit of being different, and that's being okay, were really important lessons that I learned early on.
Yeah, thank you. People listen to this podcast from all different faiths and none, and there's a kind of a common thread, I think, of curiosity about other people's spirituality. So I'd love to hear the kind of lived experience of Islam, maybe as a child, maybe it's changed now, but just talk me through maybe the rhythms. I want to get beyond the these are the facts about what it's like to be a Muslim. And that's different for everyone, right? But the Zara Mohammed texture of the lived experience of your faith, what does it mean in terms of what you do, but also how you connect with it emotionally, if that's not too an enormous question?
Oh, no, it's a good one. I think I've always had a really curious mind, and even my approach to religion itself was critical. I'm a student of philosophy. So in high school, I did do philosophy, actually. And I was always kind of, I was like, well, why am I a Muslim? No, why am I a Muslim? I had that little moment 15, 16. I was very kind of academic at a young age. So I did quite probe. And I went on that journey myself. And I remember, it was very limited. YouTube wasn't really that big. But, there were limited things that you could really do. But I got a copy of the English Quran. I kind of sought some knowledge through classes. And I just found nothing was really giving it to me. And in philosophy, we were doing like the study of knowledge, epistemology, and, we were studying all the big greats. And I remember my philosophy teacher saying, well, this is either going to go two ways for you. Either this is going to increase you, or you're going to find that you need to walk away. But I think in some ways, understanding how to ask the right questions helped me. And so when I started reading the Quran, I was praying anyway, there was a bit where I got to and it really connected to me. Whatever was going on that day, whatever was happening. And I read all of those books that you're talking about as in the facts, but this was a really emotional connection in which I felt for the first time, wow, this really speaks to me. And I think what I learned about faith in that sense is that actually, until you have like the root of it, until you believe at a root place in which there's like a moment in which everything else falls into place because of that one. And I think because I had that moment and I was a young person, I was reading it, I teared up and I felt inside my heart like a warmth and a light. And I felt, okay, like this feels right for me. And I get it now, right? I get that actually the pursuit of faith is one about connection, also about humility, but predominantly about love, And this idea that actually I have a gift in this world, I have a purpose. And whilst in the Islamic faith, ultimate purpose is to worship the Creator, the one God, but that is through service to humanity. So in some ways, it kind of brought home all those other things. And that if we're all here to serve humanity and to get to know one another as nations and tribes, and there's no compulsion in religion, that actually Islam was a very academic religion too, that invited me to be curious and to learn more. And so as I continued on my journey, I grew up in Scotland. I went to predominantly white school. It took a while before I found Muslims, which was good for me, right? Which was good for me because then I had to kind of figure out my faith and how to express it with a predominantly a non-Muslim audience. And I remember when I put my headscarf on in university, so you could imagine I'm having all these really important milestones. So kind of leaving high school, really understanding, right, yeah, no, I do want to be Muslim, but I need to continue learning. Getting into university in my first year, I couldn't find the Muslims still. Going to law, hardly any kind of, I don't know, one or two, but, again, it's like, I'm just drawn to certain people. I wasn't drawn to them. So, there were, and I would always make loads of friends. But then again, thinking, I felt like I needed to put the headscarf on. I felt like that was the next part of my journey. And I remember how big a deal people just wear it. I was like, no, I'm not going to wear it until I want to wear it. And this is about me and my Creator. This is about me and God. And I'm going to wear it for the right reasons. And for me, that is it is going to be representing the faith because people will visibly see me as Muslim. But B, because I believe that it's important for my spiritual journey. And that's what people don't really appreciate about the headscarf is that whilst it's visibly about a sign of modesty and a kind of identification, for a woman who wears the headscarf, as I then soon discovered, your life suddenly changes because my colleagues in law changed how they were to me. And I was president of the Law Society. And I remember one individual in particular was so uncomfortable with me wearing the headscarf that you knew it was for no other reason but that. And I thought, but I'm still the same person. I'm still Zara. I'm still I've still got everything that I had before because it was a summer break. I put the headscarf on and come back to uni. And I just remember thinking to myself, wow, is this what it's going to be like? And a friend said to me, well, I could never wear that. I wouldn't get a job. And that hit. And I said, well, I wouldn't want that job, me being feisty. But I realized that actually, it was really difficult to get a job after I put it on. I remember like public transport became difficult. People would look at me. I mean, and I just thought, wow, like this is something now that is not just a choice that I've made, but apparently a challenge for society. And on the other hand, though, I did attract all the Muslims because I was visibly Muslim now. So Islamic society, here I come, got involved there. But what I really learned about faith, but I think that it was important for me to have experienced Islam without a headscarf and with, because when I joined the society and worked my way up the ranks, I was really, really inclusive. I didn't care what you looked like, whether you came with a mini skirt to the prayer room and, because people had all these, you got to be really modest, got to be covered up. And I said, well, if that person wants to pray, let them pray, right? Everybody is welcome. I would go out and I would say salams, peace to everybody. I wouldn't judge anybody. I mean, I hosted a fashion show as part of our Discover Islam Week, a modest fashion show, all for ladies, because I thought, it should be fun. Like people should be able to express who they are and not feel I've got to be in one kind of row. And then when I met in the prayer room, we had Malaysians and Indonesians and people from Sudan and Ethiopia. And I thought, wow, Islam is really vibrant. It's really colorful. It's really different. And so all of those really shaped my journey, that actually it's not one type of way of expressing your faith. Obviously, we've got our pillars, but it's so important for you to understand that this is about, serving others, bringing others, making people feel warm and welcome, but also thinking of the challenges that you face, how much harder it will be for someone who maybe doesn't speak English as a first language or has come from, as a refugee community. So I think that kind of instilled this kind of feeling of like, oh, this is a bit of an injustice. I think I should do something about it. And, here we are now, the Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain, very, very visibly at the front.
Yeah. How much do you trace it? I've spoken to several Muslims who talk about 7/7 in the UK as a very specific hinge point in their life of an understanding that their identity was public property, and therefore the choices that they made of how they presented themselves became higher stakes. How much did you experience that a private spiritual decision had a powerful public impact? How much is that the seed of the job you do now, do you think?
I think I was really young at the time. And so both 9/11, I remember being in primary school, like, what's going on? 7/7, I was in my teens. I knew that there was like this real negativity around Islam and Muslims, but I didn't understand the politics. And then at university, when I put my headscarf on, it'd been a bit of a while since all of those things had happened. So I understood that, it's because of this terrorism stuff, But again, I didn't really understand the politics of what was going on. I think it was more during my student activism when we were trying to get speakers or, trying to do things. There was always this kind of additional layer of paperwork. Or I remember at one point, they're even considering like closing the prayer room down or, so there's all these other kinds of conversations. And then I started to think, oh, okay, there seems to be something else at play here. And then I think once I started to really, the politics in Islam, I remember being in a security studies class, because I was doing politics. This is my final year. You could choose a couple of modules. I think I chose that one. And there was a topic, or it brought up about terrorism, naturally, and about, extremists who kind of propagated that they were doing this in the religion. I remember everybody looked at me, and everybody looked at me because I think the teacher had made some kind of statement about, the martyrs, and he looked at me and as if I was like the spokesperson for this situation, or I had some kind of deep insight, and that was a really difficult moment. I remember thinking, oh my gosh, these are all my classmates. I'm a fourth year politics and law student, and I'm sitting here and everybody's staring at me because of this topic of terrorism, and like, what's it got to do with me? And I think that was a really big moment for me where I kind of thought, well, hold on a minute. And I remember I had another class. It was there was a small module about religion and politics. And there was a real, like, someone was kind of attacking religion for being really patriarchal or whatever it was, right? And in the Quran, it uses the term he for God, but it was a complete misunderstanding of Arabic and pronouns and how actually he is just referring to a dominant, it's not a gender. But I remember how difficult it was for me to just say something. I really struggled in that moment because I was like, do I bring up? I didn't feel like, was I an advocate now? So I think I had all these little moments in which I was being probed to do something or say something, but I didn't see myself as like that kind of, what are we all going? So I remember then I think after those moments, I was like, no, I'm not going to just stay silent. I'm not going to not say anything. I'm going to speak up. And I think joining the Islamic Society gave me that kind of leadership experience, which I hadn't had before. Then, joining that kind of national student scene as well, where I realized, Muslim students across the UK were all being vilified, for having speakers, or we weren't allowed to do this, or ISOCs were being spied. So then I've met the others. And then I thought, wow, like, what's going on here? Like, we are the youth. Like, we're doing, this kind of, that we were doing blood drives, Believe and Do Good campaign we had, which was inspired by the Quran and the Quranic verse. And it was like 5 acts, doing acts of good, feeding the homeless, helping the elderly, donating blood. There's a whole range of things. And we had like Islamic Societies across the country taking part. I think it was over one of the months or a week or whatever. So we're doing all this good stuff, but at the same time in the news, it was like really aggressive, So that's kind of where I found myself thinking, what was my role? But again, I had no aspiration to be in such a big platform. But I think in some ways, that fire in the belly where you're feeling like, why is every single Muslim in this country now being told they have to respond?
Yeah. Obviously, you weren't cowed by it, but I wonder, did you have dark nights of the soul? Were you tempted to just take the scarf off and stay private about things? And was that something that comes up in your prayers? Is something that you kind of wrestled through with God?
I mean, I'm quite grateful that I never had that one. And because I think when I put my headscarf on, it was really a decision I had made and thought through and consolidated. It's a bit different, I think, if you've just put it on and you weren't really sure. And then so for me, it kind of brought a level of certainty, but it was testing. But I kind of felt like it emboldened me because I'm very, quite principled and strong in that sense. I think my prayers were more about give me the strength like in a more wholesome way. So it wasn't just about the headscarf, but it was like, just give me strength, like to continue, because being a Muslim is hard. Being a Muslim is difficult, especially when you've got a law degree and you can't get a job and you're perfectly, capable. And I had loads of accolades and experience, and I just thought, right, I think I know what,
Do you mind saying a bit more about that? You applied for legal jobs after university?
Yeah, and I just really struggled to get a job, to get an interview. And I'd kind of thought, well, I've done, I was president of this, all this extracurricular experience. But I think, I was wearing the headscarf at that. Obviously, you can't say it's based on this or that. But for me, it was like blatantly obvious. I'm Muslim, I've got a Muslim name, I wear a headscarf, I've got Mohammed in my name, And it is a very competitive field. And I remember even when I was the president of Law Society, it was called the Mooting Society. It was like a debate club. I remember, we had hosted like QCs and advocates and judges. I competed in front of a Supreme Court judge. I think they used me in the law school brochure, probably as wearing my headscarf in court. Yeah. But I was thinking to myself, how
inclusive we are.
Yeah, I was thinking to myself, though, I probably was a bit of a trailblazer even at that time to have even put myself forward, to being president, to have done all these different things, been meeting all these courts and judges. I remember when I was going through the list, because we got to choose the judges for different competitions, I looked for the diversity in that list. And I think of all the 20 names of all these top, there was maybe only one Muslim name. I think maybe then one other diverse name, and I made sure I put them in as judges. But I just thought, gosh, how difficult it must be in the industry if there's literally hardly anybody like you, and how is anybody else going to get it? And I think since my experience, and then learning that, from the Law Society, and I had a couple of sessions in my official position, there's still a lot of racism. If you're Sikh, for example, and you're wearing a turban, lots of challenges. It's, Muslim girls tell me that, they got asked, so do you have to have an arranged marriage? As part of an interview. Did you have an arranged marriage? And you're just thinking, wow. And she was like, I was horrified. I didn't even know what to say because I just thought, how is this person asking me? It's like in jest.
Unprofessional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those experiences, unfortunately, even since they're still there. Industries are not always changing. And I think we've had like Black Lives Matters, we've had kind of some big things. Yeah. But there are certain industries, certain institutions where racism and inequality and discrimination are still really quite rife at the top. Maybe not at the entry points, but the higher you want to go.
Yeah. And so your career or your work or the thing that takes up most of your time has taken a different path. But I'd love you to say, just as in kind of short form, what your role at the MCB, maybe what the MCB is and what your role involves, because I think there's just a lot of misunderstanding about what it stands for and the governance and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so the Muslim Council of Britain is the largest and most diverse Muslim representative body in the country. So its primary role and focus is, we're a big umbrella and we're an organization that represents organizations. So we have lots of member organizations. And these can range from mosques, madrasas, charities, women's organizations, business networks, and the like. And what we're a democratic organization. I'm elected every 2 years, and I'm elected by my members. I'm held to account every 4 months by a national council. And then obviously, so my role, so we're a representative body, we're three kind of areas of work. Community building, so that is strengthening both Muslim community relationships with wider society, but also in terms of, how do we strengthen inclusion and diversity, access? How do we develop our institutions, improve governance? All these share best practice with our mosque conferences, or, have a leadership program for women, which I'm organising. So how do we just kind of strengthen our communities, what mental health issues, all those different societal issues that we deal with. The second area is about policy and advocacy. So how do we, increase Muslims engaging in the public space, whether that's in elections or just generally participating in public life, but also how do we lobby for issues on Islamophobia or inequality in housing and healthcare? So issues that really impact Muslim communities, like COVID, for example. We were literally the national body facilitating support and connection. So we brought all the medics together, the charities together. We brought the mosque together. We were translating guidance, supporting people, the burial services. So we're just bringing all that national support and sharing it, translating, telling people, take the vaccine. It's really important. It doesn't break your fast. Then the third area is really about that kind of developing a confident future for British Muslims, particularly young British Muslims. So 50% of Muslims in this country are under the age of 25. So half of everybody I represent is a young person. So that's kind of what it is and what it does. It is a democratic...
not a full-time job, right? Or it's not supposed to be a full-time job?
It's a voluntary position that was not supposed to be a full-time job. But I think upon my election, it's more or less a 24/7 thing. I mean, I'll be at my mother's house on a Saturday and there's a breaking news story at 9:00. I got to get ready to be on the news. I spent 4 days in Wales visiting communities from Newport, Swansea and Cardiff, and from colleges to primary schools to mosques and madrasas. I mean, Bradford, Liverpool, Manchester, open iftars in Liverpool to like 1,000, 2,000 people with the Football Association and the food banks. And so it's
basically volunteering full time.
Well, for me, I mean, I do a little bit of work, but I have to kind of work as well. But I think the role has grown so much, as has the need for Muslim communities. And I think my own public profile, as I was saying before, has grown so much. People are really interested. So it's difficult to switch off and say, right, that's me doing my voluntary service for today, because there's always things going on. But because I connect this work so much to spirituality, I think I don't see it as a job. I kind of see it as an act of service and of duty. and something that I'm going to be held to a much higher standard of accountability for than if it was a 9 to 5. I literally am one of the, or if not the most senior Muslim representative in the country. And I was elected at 29 by a majority male audience. It's a lot of trust.
And it's a lot to handle. I'd love to talk about that moment where you were elected and suddenly the full glare of the world's media really turned on you. Because you're basically completely unknown. What was that experience like? The fact that, people get elected to this role on the regular and a few outlets are like, this is the new president. But because you were female and young, the reaction was bonkers. How did it feel?
It was really overwhelming, if I'm honest. I literally thought when I ran, we might get a little piece on BBC, little section on the website, Muslim Council Britain elects leader. We might get a bit of Guardian, but nobody else is going to be interested. Yeah. So when I was running, I was feeling like the pressure of, how am I going to be the Secretary General in its traditional sense of just a leader of an organisation that was large. But the minute the election result was announced, the phones went crazy. The media inbox went crazy. BBC want you live at 6 p.m. Guardian, Telegraph, Times, radio. And this is within an hour, right? My Twitter following is increasing. I was averaging that week 9 interviews a day. I had my famous Women's Hour one, which we can maybe go into a little bit. But I was so overwhelmed in that first week. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating. I was barely breathing. I didn't really understand how to deal with this level. And remember, it's lockdown. So we're still in pandemic mode. I don't have people physically around me to kind of, my colleagues, my staff, my friends. I can't visit
you. And,
like, it's going to be okay. Well, let's go for a coffee. I am at home and, I've always got family support and stuff, but it's a total different world. So I'm doing this interview live at 6 p.m. My phone has gone crazy. All my social media has gone crazy. So literally I can't, I kind of jammed in. And then I had that, I had a couple of, most of my interviews were really lovely, really supportive, but I didn't have any time to prep. And then I remember the Women's Hour one came up, and there was actually one a bit difficult. There was a couple of really difficult pieces. I mean, I did the Times, which was quite hard. It was an hour, but that was the same day as Women's Hour, I think, which was ironic. So, but the Women's Hour one was different because the premise that they told me was it was going to be really soft and gentle, and it was a really intimate cover. And then when I went on there, it was just obviously really hostile, really challenging, and I just was really confused by what I thought it was going to be and what it was. And, and then obviously that kind of became a thing. But I remember thinking to myself at the end of that week, this is not what I signed up for. This is not what I'm here to do. I'm not interested in this. And I just told my press office, like, stop. I'm not doing anymore. Tell them to wait till March. Because even the staff were overwhelmed. They could not believe. I mean, it was international. I was doing international news. And so I just kind of realized that, everybody wanted a piece of me. And the interview questions went from, oh, great, this is really wonderful, to everything about Islam and Muslims, the FAQ. And I was again being put in that box and made to answer for everything. And so I thought, no, I need to set out what are my terms and conditions for being here. And it's not
I need to think this through and take a breath.
Give me like a minute. Yeah, let me pray.
And how do you, what is your kind of theory of how you use your public voice? Particularly, I'm always interested in these fissures between people, these differences that we hold, these disagreements. And I'm thinking about both how you engage publicly from the Muslim communities outwards, but also that you are trying to create some unity across some very deep differences amongst Muslims. What have you learnt about what helps and what harms, unity, or at least respect and peace in how you use your voice?
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. There's two audiences, two really big audiences. I've got lots of audiences, but two. There's that kind of external face and that world which views faith in different ways, and particularly Islam and British Muslims, which have been in a kind of a securitized prism. So I've got this kind of negativity, although I think the pandemic was very helpful in saying, well, actually, we're part of society and we're contributing. Then I've got my internal stakeholder community, which has a young female leader for the first time ever. They've not met her. And there's lots of things we've got to change in-house too. And so some ways I'm a bit of a new thing for everybody, and they're not entirely sure what to do with me. So I think on the public face, I think principles are really important. And it's kind of knowing what are we trying to change and what are we trying to achieve, and the MCB has it's its 25-year anniversary this year. It's got 25 years of a political history and of political engagement. But I have my own way of what I want to do politically and how I want that tone of voice to sound, what I want to invite that change to be. And I bring a different
What is the tone of voice? I'm sorry to interrupt. I love that phrase. What is your tone of voice?
It's an invitation. It's openness. It's saying, well, I am a new leader and I represent something new and different. I'm not saying, my faith is the same, the principles are the same, representing my communities are the same, but can we try something different? Because guess what? I'm also a young leader. And I think that the way that we're doing politics generally is not really working, is it? So I think that kind of energy and optimism and enthusiasm, which I always try and bring through, which is, we've got to be cutting on those hard-hitting issues. But for example, on tackling Islamophobia, we hosted a parliamentary drop-in session, which was just an opportunity to talk and speak. And we partnered with Amnesty International on that. And I think some politicians who would have maybe not have been so warm to us actually warmed up because they couldn't believe I was a leader and that actually I was willing to have a dialogue. I said, we're not going to agree on everything, but can we at least try and understand this is impacting communities and we've got to do something about it? Is this surely any kind of inequality right for anybody? And so I think also, building civil society partnerships as well, looking at, when the Sewell report came out and said that institutional racism didn't exist, there was a whole sector of us that were really quite horrified. And so we joined that. I mean, we did a statement. I spoke to Baroness Shami Chakrabarti, and she said, we've got this police crime and sentencing bill, and it's really coming for Gypsy Roma communities, traveler. And I said, well, we'll do a statement. And we did a tweet about it. So we didn't need to do that because we're just Muslim. But I said, no, well, it's an injustice. And the fact that it's targeting those communities, well, why don't we amplify that? So I think there's a role for us to play in being an advocate for wider society issues. They don't need to directly benefit us, but we know that if we can't stand up for human rights and justice for everybody, it doesn't suit us either, right? So for me, there was this idea that actually we could do more, we could be more, and see ourselves as an institution that actually is a voice for good, right? Yeah. And then to my internal stakeholders, I think that really began when I started touring because Zoom meetings just do not have that same effect. So I went to meet some of the most senior conservatives, imams, scholars, academics. I went to see mosques that probably, I don't think a woman has ever kind of led that meeting. You can imagine they sat me in the chairman's seat in the office. And I thought, oh my gosh, am I allowed to sit here? But they really honored me. Everyone sat on the floor and I was sat on the chair and we had a Q&A. And so I've been touring across the country and I must admit, whatever they were on the kind of religiosity spectrum or conservative spectrum, everyone has always hosted me very well. They respect the office. They respect the mandate. And there've been difficult conversations where I've talked about inclusion or I've talked about change but I've always said it in a way, and as respect was the right word, I said, look, I'm not talking to you as a woman in leadership. I'm talking to you as a national leader. And I'm asking for your help. I'm asking for your advice and I'm asking for your support. Where can we meet in this conversation? And I think that's the ultimate lesson that I've learned is go where people are at and help them there. Don't assume that they all need to be where you are because change can't, or real change can't happen like that. And respect people's traditions, customs, and cultures, even if they don't meet your societal standards. If you really want them to change or to whatever word you want to insert there, then they have to see you as someone that respects them and is willing to kind of, take people on the journey.
So you mentioned that about generations, and I know you've said that people always ask you about being a woman leader and how difficult it is, but for you, the challenging
thing has been the generational difference, the being younger than many of the people that you're leading or asking to kind of carry out the mandate that you have been given. I do see generational differences as absolutely key to many of the divides we think are about other things, whether it's about the environment, whether it's about gender and sexuality, just many of the things we find very difficult. I would guess if you did a kind of cluster analysis, you would see so much for it's coming out generationally. What do you see those key differences are, particularly maybe in your leadership style and how you're trying to approach things? And have you found what helps?
I mean, I fully agree with you. I think the youthfulness was way harder than the gender. I literally am the age of some of my colleagues' daughters, maybe granddaughters. For even in that wider public space, I'm probably the youngest faith representative there. Maybe the youngest adult, female. Like, so I bring that whole combination where I do stand out. And, in panels and audiences, usually everybody is older than me. So it's not just like a Muslim issue. It's a societal issue. And I always say, you want to include us young people. When we get here, you don't want to listen to us. So I do think that's there. And I think you're right. I think it's other things are used to cover what is actually generational, what is actually people holding on to, well, we've always done it like this, or the threat of change. And I think we don't really have the attachment issues, the emotional attachment issues. So in some ways we can make kind of big decisions without the kind of fear of what's going to happen. I remember some of my staff, but how are we going to do it? And in my head, everything is possible, but people feel, it's the logistics. And we've had, so if you've got lived experience that always tells you it's too difficult, too hard, then you've got this really youthful leader that's like, oh, everything's possible. Yeah, we've got it. And here's tools and tricks you've not thought about. So I think number one, in terms of what to do about it, I think you really need to understand your people. You need to understand your audience, and you need to understand how to communicate change. Look, we don't always get the benefit of community. So not everybody is going to come on board. You get the early adopters, which we know about. So when you communicate, this is what we want to do, you will get people that will come on board. But most people are in the middle, and a few people are really against it. Most people, they can be swayed, but it's going to take a bit of time. I think I realized at the start I was rushing people. And one of the staff, this is a lot of change really fast. And I thought, really, this is hardly anything. So what I realized is that actually people's perception, and for me, it was like, oh, let's do a new website. Let's do a new those things that I didn't really think were a big deal. For some people were really cutting issues of who we are and what we represent. And there's that whole philosophy around taking people with you, communicating the change you want, and helping people understand, and then pacing it right. But, and I will say but, there will be some people that will be never ready to accept your change. And there will be some people that will never come on board, and you cannot wait for them. And because I have a time-bound role, I'm not in for too long, there have been decisions, and a lot of them, that I've just pushed through because they had to be done. We wouldn't be moving anywhere. And I think it's sometimes because of my age, people have questioned my ability, which really really gets me. Whether those are on positioning in politics, or, how are we going to write this? How are we going to do that? Because it's oh, well, what experience do you have? It's your steely confidence and nerve that is being tested. It's nothing about your intelligence or ability. You wouldn't be there. And I had to kind of really reach back into spirituality and remember that I was chosen to be here. And there's a reason in my life and purpose and fate that I am here, and I've got a role. So that must mean that I have everything I need to fulfill this role. Yes, I've got to learn. Yes, I've got to work with people. I've got to bring in that experience. But ultimately, I am the head of this organization. And so I couldn't lose my nerve, because there was a lot of doubters, too many advisors, a lot of negative agitators, disruptors, and me being one of them. So I think it's going to be difficult, but try your best to communicate the change, bring people on board, know where are the lines that it doesn't matter, we're going to have to push it through. And then finally, try and always have humility. Humility is really important. Like I said, when you get to the top, And that is taking time for reflection. So one thing I did after that crazy week is I went for walks every morning. It's a bit hard nowadays, chop and change, but go speak to the ducks, bit of nature. There's a local park, even if it's just 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, just take a walk don't let your morning start with just the grind. Try and we have a morning prayer. It fluctuates in time, but there's a time when it is around 6 7 a.m., which is a really nice time because you do your morning prayer, you go for a little walk, cup of tea, and then you're set. But I know the days where I dive in and it's emails first. Yeah. Those days my brain is jumbled. So the sign of a good leader is really being able to collect your thoughts and reflect. You have to reflect. Introspection will do you a great deal of good.
Yeah.
When you're deep in it, you can lose yourself and your purpose as to why you started.
I have one last question, which is maybe cheeky because I can't imagine you've had time to think about this. But what do you want to do next?
I don't know. I don't know. What does one do now? What do you do after being a Secretary General? I've definitely hit quite a high area quickly. Look, for me, I'm going to continue serving. Wherever I go, whatever I do, and there's lots of opportunities to do that. But service is what drives me. It excites me, helping people, making people feel good, listening, and being able to be a voice for I guess, tackling injustice, promoting equality, whatever it is. But I think service and servitude is really important. I don't really know. I think the way that I always see it is the most important thing sometimes is not what you do, but who you become in the process. And I feel like this is one of those kinds of journeys. Like I'm part of an institution, but I'm not going to see this institution to the end. I've only got a fixed term. So it's really about, who does Zara become in that journey? And I think, quite honestly, in the year and 8 months I've been in office, I have changed so much. The core is there, but I have changed, whether that is in confidence and self-awareness, whether that is in just personal development of, actually, I don't like this about myself, or it's in friends and networks, it's influence and travel. But I think if you're still exactly the same, sitting in the same place, doing the same thing, you haven't had any kind of incremental change, that's when you should be worried. And by change, I don't mean you go run into the wild, but I mean that you feel like growth. And I felt a lot of growth. And so if I can continue to serve and help people and hopefully still be a good person in that process, I'll be pretty satisfied. And look, I'm ready for early retirement. I'm tired. I've aged too. I'm like 60 right now.
Lie down.
Have a lie down. Let me rest.
Zara Mohammed, thank you so much for speaking to me on The Sacred.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
Well, my overarching impression of Zara is that she's a bit of a force of nature. I have rarely met someone with so much energy and clarity and confidence in what they are doing, with a really good dose, I think, of self-reflection. She said she's always being told, you're amazing, and it's easy to start believing that you are. There's such a tricky tightrope walk, I think, around confidence, because my other impression of her is this is very deep confidence. This very deep sense of, this is who I am, this is what I'm good at, this is how I'm going to throw myself at the job, which is really refreshing and admirable and makes me realize how often, maybe how rare it is, or maybe I'm not used to it from young women, but it's just there. She is who she is and she's going to do her job. And I really like it. And how much that is a kind of right and good thing. And real humility is not doing yourself down or thinking that you're less talented than you are or being less confident. In fact, it's just not the same thing as arrogance. And the spiritual danger of those kind of leadership positions, maybe even all public positions, the spiritual danger of the tightrope between kind of false humility and unnecessary self-flagellation and getting mired in imposter syndrome and arrogance does require, I think, concentration to walk that tightrope. So it's left me thinking about that. I loved the way she talked about when she was really connecting with Islam for herself, she encountered this kind of warmth and light and felt teared up. It was really reminding me of the John Wesley quote about, I felt my heart strangely warmed. And I think so many of us, our encounters with, from my perspective, with God, with a tradition or a religion or, all of the language is complicated there, but you know what I'm getting at, is so often an emotional, tearful, relief, kind of homecoming. And it was really nice to hear some of that. Really sad that she's found it difficult to get a job with a headscarf. She now has a bonkers job, which is not in fact a job. It's supposed to be this kind of voluntary, unpaid position, but it seems like she's working double the number of hours that a real job would require. And it left me thinking a lot about that Emma Barnett interview that she referred to. And I went and listened to it ahead of time and also read quite a lot of commentary around it and still don't feel much clearer about what I think, which regular listeners will know is not uncommon. It does seem to me a kind of both and situation that, yes, Zara was first day on the job and had not been as well prepped as she might have been had she known it was going to be that kind of much more newsy, political, today programming style interview. I think it was probably a mismatch of expectations because that's sort of what Emma Barnett does. And that kind of rigor and challenge to a representative group seems to me to be completely fair. But the question that caused so much outrage about, if you're a woman and you're celebrating that, but why are there no female imams, did seem to me to be a kind of misunderstanding of context and what feminism might look like in different places. But yeah, really hard interview to do on your first week in the job, and to be thrust into the limelight like that must have been completely and utterly overwhelming. The other thing it's left me thinking about is the Muslim Council of Great Britain and its place as a political football. And there's a really great piece that my colleague Simon Perfect at Theos wrote back in July 2022, which if you're interested in the kind of broader currents, we didn't really get to talk about it, but some of the ways the organisation has itself been positioned and played out in public conversations and what that means for the kind of legacy that Zara is trying to navigate. You can go and read that. And now I feel like I need a cup of coffee in order to emulate Zara's amazing energy levels. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Sacred with Zara Mohammed. My name is Elizabeth Oldfield, and you can find all our previous episodes on any of your favourite podcast platforms. Our production team is Daniel Turner and Lizzie Harvey. We are edited by Drew Hawley, and our music is by Luke Stanley with vocals by Lizzie Harvey because she is multi-talented. The Sacred is a project of the think tank Theos, and you can find out more about our work at theosthinktank.co.uk.